Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Battleground from 1949. And this is continuing my quest to review as much of William Wellman's filmography as I possibly can. Battleground is his second World War II film, and I think his second great World War II film as well, a film about the Battle of the Bulge. And it's written by Robert Prosich, who actually was in the Battle of the Bulge and came up with a lot of the ideas behind the characters, such as Ricardo Montalban's character never seeing snow before he was in Belgium, and loving baseball, the one older officer with the shattering of his dentures. All those little quirks and things that you might think are a Hollywood screenwriter's idea aren't. They're actually based on real men who served in World War II. I think that's probably why this film has such a human quality. That's something that's always been remarked about the characters in Battleground, that they feel very human. You can really feel that through the screenplay. There is a really everyman, working man's quality to it, which goes throughout a lot of Wellman's work, but I think also was going on in World War II. I mean, these were everyday guys. There was mixes of ethnicity, which there was very much so in this film. Wellman had already done the story of G.I. Joe. I've seen Battleground and the story of G.I. Joe before doing this Wellman series. I had never seen them so close together. I kind of preferred G.I. Joe because I like the G.I. Joe documentary style. I feel like Wellman's very good at a documentary style. And I was wondering why this film, which was shot on a set, the camera's a lot more still, the imagery's a lot more stark. He has a lot of stark imagery in his films, but I feel like this is the starkest, I guess. The black and white kind of clashes with each other in a much different way in this film. And it's just very much a different kind of World War II film from Story of G.I. Joe, which was kind of a film made during World War II and is like almost the opposite of Story of G.I. Joe. And so my initial reaction when I started watching the film was that I liked Story of G.I. Joe more. And then I read a quote from Wellman that said a lot of people have said that to him, and he never really understood that. He thought Battleground was his favorite of the film. He loved the script, and he loved the characters. And he thought this was the better film, but apparently, like, he really was against making this at all like Story of G.I. Joe. He didn't really want to repeat himself. Now, he did kind of repeat himself quite a bit in his career, so it's a little interesting. I've noticed there's a couple of statements about this film that seem to kind of contradict the rest of what was going on in his career. And I'm wondering if this was kind of a turning point where it does feel like he kind of just wants to do what he wants to do. He seems to not want to repeat himself in this part of his career. As he's matured, and this is 1949, he's really been at the directing thing for quite a while. This has been 20 years of directing. I kind of noticed a kind of a stubbornness in his decision, but kind of a good artistic stubbornness, a way that he's not repeating himself. And I think that's why Battleground holds a place in people's hearts as so special. It was also considered one of the most prominent post-World War II films about World War II. I guess you could also say the same thing about Best Years of Their Lives, but it's really more about the aftermath. A lot of people said this is kind of like the big parade of World War II. Every time I've watched it, I've noticed some big parade influence in it, especially with the guys towards the end when they're walking out and the new guys are coming in. That reminded me of the Big Parade, but also it's odd because the Big Parade was a huge influence on Wellman. He loved the Big Parade and very much influenced Wings. He really understood the working man, the everyman, and that goes throughout his work. I mean, he really, I think, believed in, like, had a working man's attitude about how he directed films. He really direct that with characters, especially when you have someone like Van Johnson, who's kind of an unconventional star. He worked really well in this film. I like Van Johnson a lot in this, and especially his thing with the eggs. Van Johnson in this film is definitely one of my more favorite Wellman protagonists, and probably definitely one of the best. And I always kind of remember, I've seen Battleground a handful of times, and when he puts the helmet on his head and, you know, the eggs are kind of running because he had to put them in a container so he could make the eggs later, and you see the eggs running down. It's like such a, I do what I have to do, you know, he's not going to wait to clean that off. He is kind of like the everyman of the piece. I love James Whitmore in this film. He kind of reminds me of Freddie Steele, like Freddie Steele's father or something. He has kind of that way about him. At least Freddie Steele from Story of G.I. Joe. I like James Whitmore. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. This film got a slew of Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director for Wellman, Best Editing, and actually won for Best Black and White Cinematography. And the cinematography is just strikingly beautiful. With a lesser director, this film could have faltered. It's not as complex, I think, as Story of G.I. Joe. This is really kind of more like, this is a battle, these are some guys, we're gonna do this in a Hollywood way. As much as it is filmed on a Hollywood set, it never feels that way to me, you know? I know it's a Hollywood set, but it's almost like I care so much about these characters and I'm so invested in it. That doesn't matter to me. There's a lot of movies that can draw you in and have kind of crappier special effects, but if you're invested enough in the characters, that doesn't really matter. And I think that really says a lot about Battleground sets, and I actually think they do have pretty good sets that I'm not thinking about it ever, especially when they find Ricardo Montalban's character dead. The poses they make at that last shot before they cut to the scene just always gets me. There's a lot of times I've rewound that shot. I love Ricardo Montalban because of Wrath of Khan and other things, but his work with Wellman in both this and Across the Wide Missouri and My Man and I've always liked Ricardo Montalban's work with Wellman. I don't know what it is, but there's certain quality to him, even though most of the reasons I like Ricardo Montalban are kind of these larger-than-life kind of almost caricatures or something, even though they are very threatening and real and like have a personality to them, which says a lot about Ricardo Montalban's acting. His Wellman characters felt like more real to me. They could be my coworker or something. I love the whole baseball gag he has, especially when he's throwing the snowball and the snowball suddenly comes back. The more I think about Battleground, and the more I think about what it probably meant at the time, because I think the idea of a World War II picture, when World War II had ended and they literally made films about every single branch of the military. They're all very gung-ho. Towards the end, they made documentary stuff because I think it was getting a little bleak. It had been going on for so long. But then, they didn't really believe that people would like a film like this, that people didn't want to reflect back. That was Louis B. Mayer at MGM. Really didn't believe it, and when the executive who brought this over from RKO, Louis B. Mayer, he signed off on it, but he wasn't really in love with the idea, and it became a big hit and got Oscar nominations and critical acclaim, but these guys were sarcastic and kind of everyday and weren't gung-ho and super pro-America, reflected something about the war that they had seen. Maybe some of those guys who were in World War II really hadn't seen because they were, in World War II. But I don't think anyone had seen it on this massive of a scale in a more of a Hollywood way. This is black and white, it's very gritty, but it's almost like so purposeful in a Hollywood way. The documentary style kind of softens the blow because you're like, okay, this is real. This isn't like phony Hollywood stuff. But in Battleground, since it's shot more like a Hollywood movie, a traditional Hollywood movie, at least at this time, I think that's where the shock comes from. It's unfair to compare Battleground to G.I. Joe because they're so different, but it's kind of like, why did Battleground get all this acclaim for having these sarcastic soldiers and having these realistic characters when that's clearly what happened years before with another Wellman film? And I think it's just because if you look at the cinematography and the context, I don't think people could really intellectualize that at the time. But I think that's what was going on with the viewers. There were films like They Were Expendable and things like that definitely questioned what was going on in the war and didn't make everything look like gung-ho and everything was great. But I think that was just a small period, and I don't think it caught on as well as Battleground did. Since it came out years later, I think it really got to really say something that people weren't saying at the time. And it's a hell of a picture, and it's an entertaining picture, and all the guys have little jokes, and they're all funny, and it's fun, and there's great action sequences. I mean, these are some of Wellman's, I think, best war sequences, at least, that aren't flying. But Wellman was always great with action sequences, and he was really known for his gritty kind of male bonding movies, and who better to direct like a World War II movie than this film. He really didn't want to have any women in this film, and the one girl who is in this, Denise, I believe, which was something that was also in G.I. Joe. But it's interesting, in Wings, he apparently didn't really want a woman in that, and he got Clara Bow. So there were kind of women in Story of G.I. Joe. There aren't very many, actually, come to think. I mean, his wife's in it. Battleground is just a simple mission picture. Wellman was good at working in genres, and it's like he wanted to play in the genre. He had made a certain kind of World War II film, but he hadn't really made a kind of a typical World War II film, and I think Battleground is that. But Battleground not only excels in that, but it has these very human, realistic, sarcastic characters, and I think this film plays as well as it did in 49, because these feel like characters you could have now. They're very universal, they're very real, and when characters die, it really means something. I think that's the other thing, is it's a little more sentimental about death than G.I. Joe, where it's like, okay, we have to move on, which I think was probably more realistic to what those guys would have to go through in the everyday and to that story. But in this story, they're all trapped in this one area and they have to kind of fight their way out. And when people would die, it's kind of taking place not in real time, but in a smaller amount of time, so that death will permeate through more. They do move on. They have to move on. I like Battleground. I think Battleground and G.I. Joe are so different. And it's interesting one director did both, because artistically and technically and aesthetically, they're just very, very different movies. If I'm going to make a list of the best World War II films, those are two I'm always thinking about. And both times, I remember distinctly the first time I saw both of them. There's something about Battleground that really stays with you. Part of me does think it's that mixture of being a Hollywood film, but being gritty at the same time, and the stark visuals and dialogue and the characters feeling like, that guy down the street who has his own little quirky thing, like they all felt very real in that way. He's almost mixing ideas like how he shot Oxbow with World War II picture. He makes a very full, rich Hollywood movie while not losing the artistry to it, which is something I think he really did very well, where he could make a very rich, big production, but still have like something going on behind it artistically. I read a comment he said about the writer of this film. Even though he liked working with him a lot, it didn't work out past this picture because he liked to make political films, and Wellman liked to realize you had to make films not just for yourself, but for the audience. I thought about that, and I thought kind of let down by that quote, because I thought Wellman has an artistry about it, but the reason he was such a good studio director and why he would get assignment pictures and why he could ultimately do stuff he kind of wanted to do was because he could deliver an entertaining picture for people, but also have kind of an artistry about it, and he understood that balance. And I think Battleground maybe shows that balance more than Story of G.I. Joe, because it's really being an audience-friendly picture while still showing grit, while still showing something about these guys, and really showing human characters. And he's doing everything he wants to do artistically while still giving the audience what they want, which was important, and probably giving the studio what they want as well, which was a really good hit motion picture, which this certainly was, and gave a memorable motion picture, which I don't think anyone's going to soon forget. Battleground. So if you have seen Battleground and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments, and subscribe if you would like to. So the next film in my William Wellman series will be The Star Witness from 1931. Yes, I'm going back to the 30s because I finally was able to track this film down. And I hope to see you then, and thank you for watching.